Achieve optimal scintillation at the Seattle International Film Festival, May 7th through 17th. With 203 films from over 70 countries, the festival will immerse you in a cinematic experience unlike anywhere else. Discover independent and international films, in person, in the heart of Seattle. There's something for everyone, so join the community and start experimenting. Additional information and tickets on sale now at sif.net/festival. In Dundee, Oregon, there's this monthly event in the heart of downtown that brings art, wine, music, and locally made goods to life. They call it Third Thursday. This May, and all throughout the summer and fall, stroll the streets of Dundee and experience wine country charm at a slower, more intentional pace. It's free and open to all, which makes it an approachable way to explore Dundee for the first time, while supporting local businesses. Visit traveldundee.com/citycast to unlock exclusive lodging deals for your stay in the Willamette Valley. This is CityCast Seattle. I'm Jane C. Hu, and here's what Seattle's talking about. For years, contributor Ryan Packer has been tracking incidents in which cars hit pedestrians or cyclists. We're going to talk to them about how they recently became one of their own statistics. And some Queen Anne residents are up in arms about a plan to remove parking spots. But first, we're going to check in with Seattle Times tech reporter Alex Halverson for the latest on our two local tech giants. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Also joining us to discuss, Ryan Packer, contributing editor at The Urbanist. Welcome, Ryan.
Happy to be here.
So, Alex, you recently wrote about how Amazon launched supply chain services. It's such a generic sounding name. Yes. What is that?
I'm sure there's a lot of complicated things behind the scenes, but essentially it's just them sort of placing themselves as a giant shipping titan. It's the same way a DHL or a FedEx or a UPS is. Amazon already sort of does do delivery for other retail sites. They have partners. You can buy with Prime on other websites. But a lot of that's what they call the last mile, right? From the fulfillment center to your doorstep. That's what Amazon has handled for people outside of the company for a long time. And now they're saying our logistics network is so robust, we'll handle it from raw materials to the customer's doorstep. And so that's essentially what they're promising any company that wants to take part. I imagine there'll be fees and costs associated with it, but yeah, it's just a way to really just take on companies like FedEx and UPS.
Interesting. So you mentioned they already have customers that they're doing this for. Who are those? Would we know them?
Yeah, apparently. This isn't a news release, but they mentioned American Eagle Outfitters, which is taking advantage of Amazon's parcel shipping service. So that's the very traditional from the warehouse to the customer's door. You don't need to be using Amazon's site. You can just order on American Eagle, and Amazon's now delivering that for you, apparently. Another one is 3M, the manufacturer.
Yeah, so if I'm ordering pens or office supplies, Amazon's actually helping it get to my house, potentially.
In a way, yes. They're saying that Amazon is helping them take stuff from the manufacturing site to warehouses and fulfillment centers. And those are just little pieces of the journey that Amazon can now help with. You could tap Amazon if you're this big company to do your full delivery, or you could say, hey, we want you to take it from just the raw materials site to our manufacturing sites. Whatever you want to do, Amazon will now do if you're a company taking advantage of this.
I just want to know if we're going to take things full circle and have Amazon start delivering for Barnes & Noble.
What? If Barnes & Noble wanted to, I mean, we kind of kid about that, but that was, I might be telling the story a little wrong. That's kind of the downfall of Borders. I was reading this Amazon book chronicling sort of the rise of its e-commerce site and how it, just took over the market share. And it signed these crazy deals with Borders and Toys R Us to basically take over their e-commerce for them. And we know what happened to those companies. So Barnes & Noble, stay away.
Well, the Barnes & Noble downtown just opened. So it's hey, if you want to go get your book IRL, that's really, you're closing the last mile there.
Yes.
Okay, so can Amazon really compete with these really entrenched logistics companies like a DHL or UPS or a FedEx. I mean, obviously they've been building their network for a really long time, right. But it was my understanding that they also just signed some very large deal with USPS to help them. So how does that all factor in here?
Wall Street certainly thinks they can compete. Like right after they announced the news, I saw shares of UPS and FedEx just like plummeted, which was basically them saying like, oh boy, like this is not good for these companies. I mean, Amazon's, they've got so much money. They've got so many decades of really good data on what consumers want. Their logistics network, love them or hate them, is such like, at this point, such a finely tuned, efficient machine. I bet they could do it. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, Alex, you also reported that Amazon is now also the second largest grocer. But I also am curious to hear how that squares with the fact that they just closed a bunch of brick and mortar stores here. So does that just mean that all of their deliveries are digital?
I think it really shows nobody was going to those brick and mortar stores. Really betrays that fact. Yeah, it's really interesting. I remember like under a year ago, their CEO, Andy Jassy, mentioned in an earnings call, oh, we're in the top 3 grocers in the world just through online delivery. Or maybe it was top 3 grocers in the US, just through online delivery. And I was like, well, that seems crazy. I don't know anybody who orders their food through Amazon, but I guess enough people do. And then this past earnings cycle, he grouped Whole Foods into it, which is pretty big. He said if you take their entire perishables business, so basically grocery and food and stuff, they're the second largest grocer in the US behind Walmart, which is fascinating to me. I guess, a lot of grocers are kind of these big regional chains, so they only have regional markets. So maybe that's a part of it, but I can't believe they're bigger than like a Costco or a Kroger.
God, I forgot about Whole Foods somehow being part of this equation. That makes so much more sense.
It's a very big part of it, to be fair, yes.
So what does it mean that Amazon is now everything? I mean, because we know Amazon Web Services is huge. It just seems like Amazon has become dominant in so many different sectors. Oh, I've been getting emails about the Amazon pharmacy. What sectors hasn't it gotten into yet?
I have no idea. I mean, this is like, sort of fulfills the early dreams of Jeff Bezos, who's no longer the CEO there. It was really interesting. Like as companies were sort of contracting from being these big conglomerates in the 2000s, Amazon was like, what if we, one day we're this huge conglomerate? And it took them a long time to get there. They faltered so many times. You can think through a lot of projects that didn't work. The Fire Phone or whatever it was called was just an absolute disaster. Physical bookstores didn't really work out for them.
I remember that brick and mortar store in New Village.
Yes. So, they've stumbled here. But through acquisitions and just sort of Amazon efficiency, I guess, if you want to call it that, they've really been able to sneak their way into a lot of stuff. I guess it all goes back to like delivery, right? They're able to grow grocery in big part, because of Whole Foods, but also because they found out how to get grocery delivered to people in a relatively cheap way, I guess, undercut competitors and stuff. I think you're seeing the same thing with pharmacy, right? Like figuring out how to get cheaper prescription drugs to people relatively quickly and like in efficient ways. So the next thing, I mean, they really want this sort of satellite broadband internet thing to work. They're positioning themselves to be a big competitor to Starlink. They're having a little trouble getting their satellites up in the air. Maybe that's like their next big sort of consumer push. But again, it's Amazon. Who knows? And who knows what they're going to take over next?
You know how a lot of the old Craftsman homes in Seattle used to be able to buy those out of a Sears catalog? I wonder if Amazon's going to start getting into the modular housing.
Plot twist: Amazon is what makes housing affordable in Seattle after having raised prices. Who knows?
It's not too crazy. I need to check up on this because I don't know the status of it. But you know how they have their like housing equity fund where they're, supposedly putting billions of dollars toward preserving and creating affordable housing units. A sort of branch off of that was this like homestead sort of initiative where they would partner, with like local housing authorities and like buy land for people to cheaply build houses on. So, if that sort of scales up in a few years, we could be buying or building houses on Amazon-owned land. I mean, who knows?
Amazon does everything, including sprawl.
Yes. So, Alex, I also wanted to ask you about our other tech giant in town. Microsoft announced it would be offering buyouts worth $900 million, for which 7% of its US workforce will be eligible. Why are they doing this? Like, what are the details of this? Like, what does it say about Microsoft as a company that they're trying to offer this right now?
I mean, they're a little coy on the specific why they're doing this. I personally, I think it's because their employees really didn't enjoy the massive layoffs from last summer. Microsoft views those as pretty necessary. All of tech is in this sort of weird situation right now where it's all about, like, they call it like managing headcount. And I think that's a big mix of they're spending so much money on computer chips and data centers. It's just really absurd. And, frankly, they probably did overhire during the pandemic, and they've had a sort of a tough time of leveling that stuff off. And they sort of wrap it in these like sentences and rhetoric of like, oh, we need to be a nimble, agile company. We need to flatten bureaucracy and all these things. I think it's just, they're just trying to save money in a weird way.
It sounds nicer to be like, you can choose to leave and we'll give you a relatively nice package instead of just laying you off. But yeah, what is the package if you can remember?
It looks to be a slightly, better severance package. It's a little Byzantine, like the amount of money you get depends on the months of service, per week. I don't know. It's a very like weird, complicated structure. Basically, if you've been there longer, your severance, like lump sum cash, will be bigger. You'll also get your health plan for another year. And then for the next 4 years after that, you'll be able to pay like standard COBRA rates. And then you will still get your stock vested for like the next 6 or 12 months, depending on how long you've been there. I've heard from a couple employees, they're a little disappointed with the offer. They were expecting these sort of, I guess, golden parachutes. But it looks to be slightly better than like a standard severance package.
So enough to hopefully entice some people who are already one foot out the door a little bit. Like, I'm thinking about retiring or thinking about maybe moving to another company.
I mean, that's Microsoft's hope. And crucially, they told us that there's no like non-compete limit on this. You can take it and pursue another job right away, and you won't lose the severance package or anything. So it really just seems like on Microsoft's part, it's a way to, can we lower our headcount even more without announcing 15,000 layoffs again? Because that's, I don't think, a headline they want.
That makes sense. And hopefully that this will be a win-win for some people, at least.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's such a weird like equation. Like, you're eligible for it if your age plus years at the company equals 70. So many different ways I guess you could divvy that up. Like, if you're 50 and you've been there for 20 years, that's 70. And okay, you're 50, you might want to work for another 10, 15 years. Like, take that money and, I don't know, start a startup or go work for, a smaller company, or you're free to do whatever you want, I guess, with a little cash in your pocket.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of the tech folks have been working towards early retirement already, and it seems like this could maybe just give those folks who are already prepared for it a little extra push.
I think that's the idea, yeah.
All right, let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk to Ryan about their project tracking cars and their conflicts with pedestrians and cyclists.
Hey Seattle, if you've ever wanted to see our Pacific Northwest whales, this is your moment. FRS Clipper Whale Watching is the only whale and wildlife tour departing from right in downtown Seattle. And this year, for their 40th anniversary, they're launching a brand new catamaran, the Emerald Clipper. It was built right here in Washington State, and it's designed for comfort and incredible views with spacious outdoor decks, floor-to-ceiling windows, and onboard naturalists who help you actually understand what you're seeing aboard this floating classroom. Out on the Salish Sea, you might encounter humpbacks feeding, killer whales hunting, gray whales cruising, plus bald eagles and seals and sea lions. It's not just a tour, it's a full wildlife experience. And they have a whale sighting guarantee, so if you don't see whales, you'll get a complimentary tour to use in the future. Spots fill quickly as the season ramps up, so don't wait. In fact, Sam and I have already booked our trip, and we cannot wait. You can book early too. Just go to whalewatching.com. That's whalewatching.com.
Ryan, you've been tracking cars hitting pedestrians and cyclists for years. How did that start and why?
It basically came out of me realizing how often incidents like this happen in our city, even down the block from where you live, and you don't know about it. Oftentimes, we have media coverage of crashes only when they're very intense. Someone is killed. It's a high profile traffic jam that's caused is another unfortunate reason why those are often in the headlines. And so I kind of started just tracking it on a day-to-day basis as I was going about my day. And a lot of people became very interested in that and urged me to continue.
What have you noticed through your tracking?
I'd say trends over the years have been pretty consistent. There's often very clear dry spells where there's not a lot of incidents. And I think there's definitely some trends in terms of when the weather gets nice. It's not actually too much of that, dark and rainy night where you maybe have less visibility. I think it's actually more often kind of the early summer evenings where perfect visibility. There was one night in 2024 where there were, I think, 5 or 6 within the span of a few hours. I remember that night pretty well. And then there weren't any for a while. So it's a little bit sporadic.
I've noticed that in the last few weeks, there's been maybe one a day at least just from, looking at your feed on Blue Sky.
Yeah, it was a pretty quiet first quarter of the year, as far as I could tell. And then I think things kind of are starting to pick up again with the weather getting nice and more people being out, more people getting around on foot, on bike. Yeah, it's a definite factor.
And Ryan, I know you were unfortunately one of those people lately. Are you okay? What happened?
I'm good. I'm doing well. I did unfortunately become the thing I report on. So a few weeks ago, I was in downtown on a Friday night and was crossing the street. Somebody blew through the red light and almost hit me. I caught up with them at the next light and let them know how I didn't like that. And they decided to run at me in the crosswalk and hit me. Oof. So that's what happened.
I mean, what? I'm speechless right now.
So this wasn't an accident? This was targeted?
It seems like it was, yeah.
Oh my God.
I hate that. What does one do after that? Did you try and call someone? I
didn't get a license or anything. And I'm pretty aware of the kind of low rates of getting held accountable for things like this. So it's kind of maybe I'm a victim of, knowing too much and maybe I should have followed the process, but I didn't get the license. I was focused on kind of trying to catch up with them and that didn't really work out very well. So
I'm so sorry. It sounds like, vehicular assault maybe, but
yeah, that's what I called it in the moment.
I mean, when you've got this giant ton vehicle against a person, it's really, you got to wield that with care. And I think many don't, unfortunately.
That's true.
So in other recent news, in cars colliding with what the city calls vulnerable road users, a term that I personally kind of hate, but I also kind of understand why it's used, as I mentioned, if you're just alone out there without a giant metal box around you, I guess you are more vulnerable than a driver. The city settled with Aviv Litov, a cyclist who was seriously injured by a car in 2024 for $9.25 million, which his lawyer says is one of the biggest settlements offered to a single cyclist in the city's history. So Aviv was riding along a bike lane on Green Lake Drive North. Ryan, I know you're a cyclist. I'm curious, have you ridden that stretch?
I have, yeah. That bike lane was part of a batch of protected bike lanes that the city started designing around 2020, 2021. And it's really kind of trying to do all the things at the same time, maintain parking and make space for a bike lane and also have the travel lanes. And so it's obviously, with the evidence here in this case, it's a pretty tricky spot.
Ever since that accident, every time I ride that section, including earlier this week, I just am trying to go as slow as possible just because you can't see any cars and they can't see you, which is,
Yeah.
I believe his lawyer's argument there. Alex, are you a cyclist at all, or are you familiar with this stretch or these kinds of bike lanes?
Not like an everyday, but I've definitely cycled around the city a lot. I think I know what you're talking about. I live in North Seattle, so I'm pretty familiar with the area, especially around Green Lake.
It's kind of right by the putt-putt and Green Lake.
Okay, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, the whole area, it feels sort of sketchy on a cyclist. Even like going towards Stoneway, there's a lot of that weird, you're in a bike lane or bike path, and you don't feel protected or safe, especially from blind corners and intersections. I don't, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan, I think what you're talking about by the putt-putt is the same kind of setup where it's like the bike lane is in basically the gutter.
Yeah.
Then you've got a row of parking,
Mm-hmm.
and then you've got the road furthest to the left. But I think the place where Aviv was hit was actually north of the lake, over
Okay.
by like where Duke's is, just north of there,
okay.
if folks know it.
I missed that. Okay.
But it's the same setup, and it's horrible visibility for everyone involved. Like, I can always tell when I'm around there that cars are trying to look around the corner and they just can't see anything because there are a bunch of cars in the way. But like you said, Ryan, it seems like that was the design that the city was using for quite a while. Do we know if there might be any plans to revisit that or try and daylight them a little bit more so it's easier for cyclists and cars to see each other?
We definitely have iterated since that time, and I think the new bike lanes we're building are a bit better in that regard, providing more visibility. In terms of revisiting the ones we've already built, that's a question I'm not as sure about.
Question for the city, perhaps. But in the meantime, I'm probably going to take those pretty slow so that I can hopefully keep my head on a swivel and anticipate. But really, it seems like with the settlement, I wonder if there will be some revisiting of the existing designs. All right, let's take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about a plan to remove some parking in Queen Anne. Seattle's Department of Transportation announced plans recently to remove parking from a section of 14th Ave West in Queen Anne so that there's enough room for emergency vehicles to pass through. Alex, Ryan, have either of you driven that stretch, or do you know it?
I walked over there a couple times. It's one of those roads where there's an upper part and a lower part, and there's just kind of a little bit rare in Seattle, but it happens in a lot of different neighborhoods.
Yeah, I don't drive too often, but I used to work kind of in Queen Anne. I think I've driven on that part. I think there's also a similar one sort of in Wallingford. Yeah, they even feel like dangerous just for like a regular car to drive on. I can't imagine an emergency vehicle trying to get through there. Like there's times where, Google Maps will take me that way. I'm like, can I even fit? I have a relatively small car. It's not like I'm driving like a Mack truck.
It definitely seems like roads that were maybe initially horse paths or from
like
a time
driveways or something. Yeah,
it just feels like those were not meant to be huge thoroughfares that a modern fire truck should drive through. So I know SDOT held a listening session last week about this decision. They had just kind of announced it, and in the aftermath, some of the neighbors were quite upset about it, and I think this led to wanting to have some public discussion around it. Ryan, I know you were there at that listening session. What were folks saying?
I think we can set the stage a little bit more. This upper road is, according to SDOT, 14 feet, 6 inches in certain parts. And so that's pretty narrow to be able to have a travel lane and a parking lane. And so the parking lane's being removed so that fire trucks can get through. The Seattle fire person there who was helping to answer questions was describing how they currently have to just get out of the vehicle and basically try and measure with their eyes if they're going to have enough room to go down the street, which is pretty wild. And there have been several incidences that have been delayed by fire getting down the street. It's about 50 parking spaces that are along the stretch that SDOT's going to remove. In terms of the community meeting, there were just a lot of people frustrated and trying to find some option that can keep their parking on the street. I would say a lot of those options implicitly involved parking on the sidewalk, even if most people didn't want to describe it that way. There was a lot of talk about painting a line and making sure that people don't go over the line. But you have a 14-foot road, and so you can't fit a car in a 5-foot line. So
I just looked this up. So the width of an average car is 5 to 6 feet. In the US, I would guess probably closer to 6 if you got large trucks or SUVs. And the width of a fire truck is generally about 10 feet wide. So the math is not mathin'. I see why people are trying to park up on that sidewalk.
Mm-hmm. It was an interesting meeting because at the beginning it was made explicit that this decision is not going to get changed. It's a public safety focused outcome. But a lot of people were kind of, like I said, trying to figure out another option, talking about maybe widening the street, which is kind of wild to me in terms of things that we would spend money on.
Yeah, I was looking at a document that SDOT put out with a section that was called Potential Solutions Proposed by Residents. And one of them was to remove grassy alleyways on the sidewalk to widen the road. And my other favorite one was to get smaller fire trucks.
Yes.
It says in Japan, fire trucks measure up to 4.5 feet thinner in width. In Europe, they're 2 feet more narrow. Even San Francisco buys smaller trucks. And they were just like, well, no, these are the trucks we have, you guys. Like, we're not going to like redo all of that.
It's so funny to me. Like, we're not going to get smaller consumer cars. We're gonna demand that our
we couldn't possibly get like
our
a
utilities
compact.
get smaller. Yes.
Well, the fire truck size is a really interesting issue, and actually is a little bit of a hobby horse for a lot of urbanists when it comes to the size of fire trucks. And so, because you have an emergency vehicle that's very large, and so the size of that vehicle determines a lot around our streets. Except we know that when it comes to main roads, not residential roads like this, but when it comes to main roads, the wider that road is, the more people in regular cars tend to speed and get in crashes, which then have to be responded to by large fire trucks. And so it's a little bit of a circular path to making sure that our streets are wide enough to accommodate the fire trucks that need to respond to the cars crashing that are going too fast.
Ugh. Well, I know one of the concerns brought by residents at this meeting was also that if there's no parking along that street, they were worried that people were going to go really fast down it because they'd have more space. So I feel like that's like a microcosm of what you're describing too, Ryan.
A little bit, yes.
So how did it get this way? I mean, like Alex mentioned, there are other streets in Seattle that feel similarly narrow that don't seem to have that, or it doesn't seem like that issue has been brought up yet, but is this an indication of where things could be going for those roads? Like, I guess I'm curious, why has this come up now when the street's always been this narrow?
Yeah, so Seattle Fire kind of basically goes off of where they get complaints. And so this one kind of just triggered enough times. It's clearly been an issue for decades. Obviously, cars are getting bigger. And so I think that's certainly a factor. But the SDOT and fire are not going around to every street and making sure that there is width. Basically, they're not doing a comprehensive sweep of the city. The lower portion of this road has parking on it as well, but it's a little bit wider. And so even though it's not standard, they're not going to take out the parking on that side. And so it's basically really only doing this when we absolutely have to.
Yeah. So you mentioned there's the upper part and the lower part, and I believe both of those are currently one way.
They're not right now. They're going to go.
Right
they're
now.
going to go one way. They're going to be turned one way.
What? I don't see how anybody could possibly. I mean, if you have someone coming towards you, it feels even more of a dicey situation than in a usual street, which is already quite narrow.
A lot of these weird narrow streets aren't one way. Like I can specifically picture the one. I'm pretty sure it's in Wallingford. It's right next to I-5. It's like you take it down and it meets the like Burke-Gilman Trail and on your way to Gasworks Park. And, it's along some houses. It's very residential, but you get stuck on it somehow. And it's not one way. And if someone's coming, there's cars parked on the side of you. There's a grassy sort of hill on the left side of you and you're screwed. You're like, okay, I got to back all the way up, or we're playing a weird game of chicken here.
Yeah, I feel like driving in Seattle is not for the faint of heart.
No, I don't enjoy it.
Well, that's all for today here at CityCast Seattle. Alex Halverson, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And Ryan Packer, thanks as always for bringing us your reporting.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm your host, Jane C. Hu. Listeners, we want to hear from you. If you live on Queen Anne and you got thoughts about 14th Ave West, drop us a line. You can send us an email at seattle@citycast.fm. You can also text us or leave us a voicemail on the CityCast hotline at 206-880-3931. Until next time, see ya, Seattle. If you're enjoying the podcast, be sure to follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen so you never miss an episode. Also, leave us a little review. It's really helpful. And tell your friends about us. You can also get more local news and events delivered right to your inbox by subscribing to our newsletter. Just go to seattle.citycast.fm. And you can find us on Instagram, Blue Sky, and TikTok at CityCast Seattle, and you can watch full episodes of this show on YouTube.